Autumn 1942, Volgograd region. Dusty roads, rusty barbed wire fences, and endless lines of trenches. Height 227.04, a strategic point offering a view for dozens of kilometers. The Soviet command understood, the loss of this height would mean losing control of the railway junction and the supply routes to the front. Sergeant Alexei Krevtsov was one of those who arrived here from near Kharkov after heavy fighting. A short, wiry man with gray eyes and a scar on his cheek. He never said anything unnecessary. Reliable in battle, calm in the rear. The soldiers called him the Stone. He had already been through a lot, from the first days of the war in border garrisons to the defense of Kiev and the retreat through the snowy forests of Ukraine. All he had left from his past life. A letter from his mother. A dented cigarette case with an engraving. And a photo of his wife, who had died in the bombing of Minsk. The battalion commander summoned him to the dugout. A grim captain with bloodshot eyes bent over a map on his knees. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but from sleepless nights and constant tension. He looked at Alexei for a long time, as if trying to carve his face into memory. "Krevtsov," he said hoarsely. "The situation is serious. Tonight we're pulling back down. We've stretched too thin on the flanks. The Germans are advancing from both sides. Someone has to stay on the height, to the end." Alexei silently nodded. "Alone," the commander repeated. "Hold them back for at least a day. Ours will come after that. I can't promise anything beyond." "I will, Comrade Captain." The commander extended his hand. It was cold and dry. At that moment, an invisible exchange passed between them, of respect, of necessity, of inevitability. The sky hung low and heavy over the horizon. Black clouds thickened from the smoke of fires, craters, and shell explosions. In the distance, artillery duels could be heard. Birds had long abandoned this land. Only the wind whistling through the barbed wire and the crunch of earth under boots remained as witnesses. At dawn, he saw them. German scouts appeared from the southern slope, 5 men in helmets with rifles, cautious and alert. They moved low to the ground, as if sensing danger. Alexei silently pressed himself to the machine gun nest, waited until they were closer, and fired a burst. The first bullet struck the one on the edge. The second pierced the next. The rest scattered. Alexei threw a grenade. The explosion echoed, and cries of pain filled the air. He understood, they now knew the height was occupied. They would return in greater force. Throughout the day, he continued to fortify his position. He knew reconnaissance was just the beginning. They would bring in artillery and follow with infantry. Krevtsov checked every trench, laid paths to the rear dugout, and arranged a backup exit. Mines were placed around the height. He had set them himself the night before, knowing these rings of death might give him a chance. Throughout the day, he continued to fortify his position. He knew reconnaissance was just the beginning. They would bring in artillery and follow with infantry. Krevtsov checked every trench, laid paths to the rear dugout, and arranged a backup exit. Mines were placed around the height. He had set them himself the night before, knowing these rings of death might give him a chance. Late in the evening, the first message came over the radio. "Hold on. Reinforcements are coming." 2 words, as if the entire world had shrunk into those letters. They became his prayer. The night passed in unease. Alexei dozed off in brief snatches, clutching his submachine gun. Every rustle seemed like footsteps. Every knock like a rifle bolt. But the enemy did not come. In the morning, when the sky lightened and the first gray rays broke through the clouds, he got up and took position at the machine gun nest. A light frost had gripped the earth. A frozen drop hung from his bayonet. He froze, listening. He took up position and opened fire. The machine gun sang its heavy song. Bullets cut through the air in a sweeping arc. The front ranks of the enemy fell, but new ones pushed forward. Grenades flew down. In one hand, he held a PPSH submachine gun, in the other, an RGD grenade. Enemy soldiers spread out like ants, trying to flank him. He dashed from one nest to another, blood on his face, bruised fingers trembling, but his thoughts were clear. Each second was a battle. One of the mines he had set near the cliff went off with a deafening boom, taking 3 men with it. Alexei hurled a grenade into the trench on the flank. An explosion followed, a scream. He shifted position again. The enemy was closing in. His ammo was running low. He pulled out a second magazine and reloaded. Dust, smoke, and the stench of gunpowder mixed into a haze. One German ran up to the ridge. Alexei shot him square in the chest. The man flew backward. Another came with a flamethrower. Alexei waited, then cut him down with a short burst. A nearby bush caught fire, but the flame died quickly. The earth was damp. Time no longer existed for him. Only the battle remained. The trench had become his entire world. The machine gun was his voice. The grenades, his arguments. Everything else had vanished. Only death lingered nearby, always, but it didn't take him. Not yet. One of the armored vehicles reached the southern flank and opened fire from its mounted gun. Alexei rolled down into a lower level of the trench, flanked it through a gully, crept to a turn, and hurled a bundle of grenades. Boom! The machine tipped over on its side. Black smoke rose. Screams came from within. The second vehicle turned back. The assault faded. Krevtsov pressed himself into the dugout lined with sandbags. The ground trembled as if a beast was awakening inside it. Shells tore through the trenches, lifting parapets and planks into the sky. One especially close hit hurled a log fragment at Alexei, but he withstood it, only scratching his shoulder. The entire dugout seemed alive, groaning, creaking, and crumbling. When the shelling ceased, a terrifying silence followed. No birds. No wind. Only smoke and the bitter smell of burning hung in the air. Alexei stood up, wiped his eyes, and peeked out. He climbed out and immediately saw movement. From the fog on the eastern slope, silhouettes began to emerge, first dozens, then hundreds. The Germans advanced in formation, methodically, hugging the ground. 2 armored personnel carriers crawled behind them. Then the air cracked over the height. A mortar whistled past and struck somewhere below, throwing up a pillar of earth. Then another. A third. The artillery barrage had begun. Alexei leaned against the trench wall, breathing heavily. His face was smeared with mud and soot. He sat down, pulled out his flask, took a sip. His hand trembled. His head rang. He had survived until evening. The radio crackled, static at first, then a voice. "Krevtsov, do you hear me? Are you alive?" "Alive," he exhaled. "Hold on. We'll try to break through at night." "Can't yet. Artillery's still covering. Everything's under control. Wait. Wait." Again, that word, like a sentence, like hope. He didn't sleep that night. He listened. He wrote a few lines to his wife in his notebook, then tore out the page and clenched it in his fist. If he was killed, let it speak. Let it be found. At dawn, he was back at the machine gun. The heights still held. Alone. Everyone was dead, but he was still alive. When night descended upon Hill 204, it brought not just darkness, but a strange, almost excruciating silence. After the roar of mortars and the screams of attacking soldiers, the quiet felt unreal. Alexei lay in the damp trench, pressed to the earth, staring into the blackness. The wind had calmed, and every sound now seemed like a shot. Somewhere in the distance, a lone machine gun rattled. Perhaps the Germans were finishing off the wounded, or maybe it was a psychological tactic, to remind him they were close, and awake. He cautiously crawled out of his shelter and, using the complete darkness as cover, circled his position. He made sure the mines were still in place, the trenches hadn't caved in, and there was water. He dragged another box of ammunition closer and placed grenades carefully nearby, 3 to the right, 2 near his left shoulder. He wondered, would it be enough? There was no answer. Inside, everything burned, from exhaustion, from cold, from isolation. The human body is not built to fight alone. In combat, a man is part of a unit, a link in a chain. But alone, it's different. It's walking the edge. It's defying nature itself. Alexei knew, if it started again, he could only rely on instinct. His mind was worn out. His soul, silent. Only the body and will remained. Suddenly, he remembered his father, who had also been a soldier in the First World War. He came back with one leg, silent, stern. But once, the night before he died, he said, "Don't try to be a hero. But if you're cornered, don't surrender." Back then, Alexei hadn't understood. But now, those words rang with a new meaning. A simple truth: the essence of a man is not in shouting or promises, it's in silently holding on. So he held on. Around midnight, the silence was broken by a faint sound, a click, somewhere near the wire. Alexei froze. His fingers gripped the submachine gun. The click repeated, then again. He raised himself slightly and began crawling toward the outer edge of the position, hugging the ground. There was no light, but his eyes had adjusted to the dark. And then he saw it, movement. A shadow. Another. Dozens. The Germans were moving in silence, trying to feel their way through the minefield. Alexei waited until the first group drew closer. Then he threw a grenade. A lunge. A flash. An explosion. A scream. He opened fire with the machine gun. Second sector, fire again. He moved like a shadow, refusing to be cornered. The enemy recoiled, ducked into the dark. The hunt had begun. They knew he was alone. He knew they were many. But he had the advantage. He knew the terrain. One of the mines went off, a scream. A second one. Alexei dashed along familiar ravines, firing in short bursts, conserving ammo. It seemed to him that he had become not a man, but the height itself, cold, stony, untouchable. They shouted at him in German, calling for him to surrender. He answered with gunfire. The assault faltered in confusion. The Germans retreated, leaving behind the wounded. Silence returned, stinking, sticky, humming. Alexei wiped his forehead, under his fingers, blood, sweat, and dirt. He returned to the dugout, pulled the sack of crackers toward him, ate one, washing it down with water. It felt like marble chewing marble. He closed his eyes but did not sleep, only listened. During the night, there were 2 more attacks, smaller, more cautious. He repelled them. By morning, only debris and smoke remained. The sun rose slowly. The radio was silent. Then static. A voice. Krevtsov, are you alive? He pressed the button. Alive, for now. Lots of Germans. They're attacking. 3 days already, we know. We're coming today during the day. If you survive, this victory is yours. Wait. Wait. Again. But now with hope. He looked at the sky. For a moment, the clouds parted and a ray of light touched his hand. He smiled faintly. The hill was alive, and he with it. The 4th morning began not with a gunshot, but with fire. Alexei hadn't yet risen from the trench when black smoke plumes rose above the hill. At first, it seemed like fog, but the air was hot, bitter. Something big was burning. Then came the boom. The Germans had set fire to the grass on the slopes, hoping the flames would drive him from his cover. The wind was on their side. The tongues of flame quickly devoured the dry bushes and dead leaves. Fire crept upward, toward his trenches, his last defense. Alexei acted instantly. He dragged a canteen from the dugout, began soaking the walls, the ground, his clothes. Then he rushed to the nearest edge, where the fire was approaching fastest, and beat back the flames with his boots, a shovel, sand. His eyes burned, his lungs screamed from the choking smoke, but he didn't stop. The hill must not burn. He could not retreat, not even before fire. Finally, just as it seemed everything would be engulfed, the wind shifted. The fire turned and blew back down the southern slope. Alexei staggered and collapsed into the bottom of the trench. He had survived, again. He knew, they would come now. He said, I waited and lost consciousness. Alexei woke up in the medical ward of a frontline field hospital. Everything around him was dim. It smelled of iodine, blood, and bitterness. He lay on a rough army cot, wrapped in a blanket, with tight bandages on his chest and leg. His body felt foreign, he couldn't feel his left arm, and every breath came with pain. A young nurse with dark circles under her eyes noticed he had come to and quietly called the doctor. A major, gray-haired, with a perpetually furrowed brow, hurried in. "Well, the hero has returned to us," he asked while checking the bandage on Alexei's shoulder. "Can you speak?" Alexei nodded, but speaking was difficult. He whispered, "Are the guys alive?" Reinforcements came. The Germans retreated. "The height is ours." "And you, Krevtsov, lie still, you gave them hell. All the commanders are talking about you." Alexei turned away. He felt no pride, no joy, only emptiness. It seemed he had remained on that hill, together with the earth, the trenches, the ashes. He didn't know how much time had passed, a day, 3, a week. It all merged into one long, heavy stretch. Later, commanders visited him, brought cigarettes and award papers, spoke with raspy voices. "We sent the report to HQ, you'll be recommended for a decoration." Hill 221, Day 4, was now marked in red on the map. He nodded, not for the awards, not for the glory. He stayed simply because he knew that if he left, everything would be lost. His comrades from the company visited, alive, exhausted, dirty. They were silent. Only one sergeant shook his hand and said, "Without you, we wouldn't be here." For the first time in a long while, Alexei smiled, not broadly, just with his lips. But it was enough. 2 days later, he was able to stand, leaning on a crutch. He walked through the ward, looking at other wounded, some without an arm, others missing an eye, some just staring at the ceiling. War spared no one. He realized he had been lucky, and for that, he needed to keep living. He stepped outside. The air was fresh, autumn air. In the distance, artillery thundered, but not nearby. He sat on a bench and looked at the sky. A young lieutenant sat down next to him. "I saw you hold the hill. I was in that assault wave. We thought you were already dead out there. But you..." Alexei nodded. "I thought the same." A pause fell between them. Then the lieutenant added, "You're a legend now, Comr." A soldier held the hill alone for 3 days, against an entire company, against armored vehicles, against flamethrowers. Alexei tightened his grip on the crutch. Against everything except his conscience. The next day, he was summoned to headquarters. He stood before a general, a tall, gray-haired man decorated with medals. The general looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Krevtsov, the motherland is proud of you. We're forwarding your story to Moscow. You will receive the gold star of the hero. Do you object?" Alexei was silent for a moment, then replied, "I would like there to be plaques on the graves of those who stayed up there. There must be no nameless ones." The general nodded. "There will be. I promise." Alexei returned to the tent. That night, he couldn't sleep for a long time. He saw the hill again, saw himself in the trench, heard the rattle of gunfire, the explosions, the screams. But now he knew, it had not been in vain. A few more days passed. Alexei now walked around the camp without a crutch. He participated in political sessions, listening as officers read out the order of the High Command, which mentioned the hero of Height 221. Newspapers passed from hand to hand, they carried reports of the feat, clippings with photographs of the soldier in uniform. But all that glory no longer held the same value for him. What remained real to him were the faces of those who had not returned. Over and over, he replayed the moments of battle in his mind, as if searching, had he missed something? Could he have saved one more? That search never stopped, neither day nor night. One evening, he sat by the fire with young soldiers, listening to them argue about the upcoming offensive. One of them, a soft-voiced lad named Nikitasa, suddenly asked, "Comrade Sergeant, how does one not feel fear?" Alexei paused. He stared into the fire, as if searching for the answer there. Then he said quietly, "There's no such thing as not being afraid. There's only going despite fear. Fear is life. Only the dead feel nothing. And we are alive. That means we're afraid, and we go anyway." Those words would later be passed from one to another, like a truth burned into them by the fire of battle. Command would not yet release Alexei back to the front. For now, he was to be sent to Moscow, to receive his award, to be shown as a symbol. He was burdened by this but understood, orders are orders. They placed him on a medical train, issued him a clean tunic, gleaming boots, and a brand new cap. At the station, he was met by officers, representatives from the newspaper Krasnaya Zvezda, Red Star, and even a famous writer, with a mustache and a leather notebook. Alexei held himself straight, not like a hero, but like a soldier. At the ceremonial gathering, he stood at the podium and felt the floor tremble beneath his feet, not from fear, but from the unnecessary pomp. Standing beside him were true heroes, artillerymen, tank crews, pilots. Each of them was ready to return to where death walks nearby. Alexei gave a speech, short, quiet. "Thank you for the recognition, but I wasn't alone. There were others too. I just happened to stay." After receiving the award, he was granted a short leave. He went to his home village, where everything remained almost as he remembered, except his mother had grown older, and the local school had closed. He was greeted warmly, modestly. He didn't speak of the war. He spent a lot of time sitting in the garden, listening to the wind, drinking water from the well, watching children run down the street, and thinking, "Let them run. Let them have what I didn't." Before leaving, he visited the school. In an old classroom, his photograph hung beside a portrait of the marshal. He sighed. It wasn't necessary, but if it served as an example, then so be it. A week later, he returned to his unit. Now, they welcomed him as a senior, as a living legend. But again, he asked to return to the front. Once more, the battalion commander resisted. Eventually, he gave in. "All right, Krevtsov. You're one of those who can't live without the front. I'll send you into reconnaissance. It's a fight every day. That's where we need you." Alexei smiled, for the first time, genuinely. He took the map and gear and said, "Just don't forget, height 2204 isn't just a point on a map. It's blood, earth, and those we won't forget." Reconnaissance was never just a fight, it was always a step into the unknown, where behind every tree could be an ambush, behind every path, death. Alexei knew that. And still, he moved forward. He quickly settled into his new role, quiet, resilient, attentive. They called him by his old nickname again, the Stone. In the unit he joined, there were all kinds of soldiers, former miners, students, peasants. But they all knew who he was. He didn't command, didn't boast, but when someone needed to go, he went first. Reconnaissance missions stretched for weeks, through marshlands, forests, night marches. Alexei led the men along subtle trails, listening to the crack of a dry twig, noticing the glint. To the optics on the slope, several times they reached enemy posts and quickly eliminated the sentries. He once again felt that focused intensity he had known on the height, only now, he was not alone. Behind him marched others. The responsibility had become even heavier. One day, after a successful raid, the brigade commander summoned him. It was an elderly colonel with a Suvorov medal and a precise, dry voice. He unfolded a map and pointed at one of the hills marked with the designation 2029. "Right here, Krevtsov. The Germans have a fortified area, machine guns, bunkers, artillery links. According to our data, they'll begin an offensive from this direction in a week. We need to know everything, not just the layout, but how the guard operates, what the patrols are like, how the approaches work. And preferably bring us a prisoner. Can you do it?" Alexei silently studied the map. The terrain was difficult, slopes, thick forest, open land at the approaches. He nodded. "I can. But I'll need 3 men. Only reliable ones." The commander handed him a list. Alexei chose those he already trusted: Dranov, a former topographer, Kellen, a grim Siberian with eyes like ice, and the young but already experienced Nikita, the same one who had once asked him about fear. The 4 soldiers set off into the night. The journey to height 2000 near Avdiivka took almost 2 days. They moved through ravines, crawled to clearings, froze under bushes when they heard the distant hum of engines. On the final evening before the operation, they made camp. Alexei unfolded the map, traced a layout on the ground, and spoke softly. But each of them understood, if they missed the mark, they wouldn't come back. He looked at Nikita, at his tightly pressed lips, and remembered himself when he was young, scared but stubborn. He knew now that this young man was becoming a warrior. By dawn, they reached the forest edge. Through his binoculars, Alexei saw concrete bunkers, barbed wire, and gun positions. There were many. But also weaknesses, guard shifts, patrol patterns. Everything was written down. Then they waited for the right moment, and stormed the camp. It was a risk bordering on madness. But they executed perfectly. Kellen took out the sentry. Nikita captured the communications officer. Dranov covered the retreat with a smoke grenade. The captured German was wounded but alive. He remained silent, but the documents in his bag said far more: maps, plans, even codes. Their return while the return was difficult. They were pursued for several hours. They ran, hid, swam across an icy river. Once, a bullet whizzed past Alexei's ear, but they made it out and delivered the intelligence. The command met them like victors. Alexei only asked, "Will we have time to prepare?" The colonel nodded. "Now we will, thanks to you." Alexei looked at the map. The enemy would attack again. And again, someone would have to stand, alone or with a squad. But the point wasn't in numbers. It was in endurance. 3 days after the reconnaissance mission, what they had anticipated, and feared, began. The Germans struck the entire front line. Their artillery hit our positions as if the heavens had cracked open. Alexei, now with a new group, was on the western flank, in trenches near a small forest behind which lay fortifications. The command no longer let him go far. He had become part of the assault reserve, deployed wherever the front was breaking. The battalion commander was blunt. "Krevtsov, you're like a cork in a barrel, you hold things in place while the others survive. So we'll hold with you." And hold he did. The first day of the offensive was pure hell. The sky roared with Junkers bombers pounding the trenches. The earth burned. Shells tore through the air. Soldiers curled into balls. Each prayed, or cursed everything. That evening, a new order arrived. The company Alexei was in was to be withdrawn for reorganization. The losses were severe. Out of 100 men, only 32 remained. The rest, either in hospitals, or under a thin layer of earth. Alexei didn't argue. He walked like a machine. Overloaded with memories. Each step echoed with pain. In his side, under his ribs, in the old wound on his shoulder. But he walked. And behind him walked the young ones. Not by command, not by order. Just following him. They were taken to a small forest with dugouts. There, for the first time in weeks, they could finally take off their boots, wash, and eat something. Someone even laughed, for the first time. Alexei only nodded. Joy was not his tool. He was like a core, cold, strong, indispensable. The command offered him a real leave. With a train, a destination, and a ticket. He looked at the paper for a long time. Then slowly folded it in half. "I'm not going." The colonel frowned. "What are you doing, hero? Don't you value yourself?" Alexei looked straight into his eyes. "I do. But my people are here. Let home wait." And he stayed. Not because he didn't want to see his mother or his home. But because he knew. For every second of peace, someone had to stand and hold the line with their life. And if not him, then who? In the following days, he again took part in operations. Went on reconnaissance. Escorted sappers. led convoys through minefields. He knew where to step, how to listen to the earth. He became the senior among the survivors. Even those of higher rank looked to him as an anchor. He didn't raise his voice, didn't recite the regulations. He just went first. And always came back. One night, Nikita approached him. That same boy, now a sergeant. Alexei Pavlovich, what happens after? When all of this is over? Alexei was silent for a long time. Then he stood, looked at the glowing ember in the fire, and said, "Then, we'll remember. And try to live in a way, so it never comes back." The next morning, a new radio message arrived. Height 220. M4 was under threat again. The Germans were circling from the north. They had to move immediately. Alexei just grabbed his rifle, adjusted his helmet strap. He was expected. He knew. The circle would close. He would go again. Back to where it all began. They moved toward the height in silence. A column of tired but focused soldiers. Advancing between bushes and deep ravines. The air was tight, like a string. It carried the weight of impending disaster. Alexei walked in front. Weapon against his chest, listening to every sound. Behind him, Nikita, silent, serious. And others, familiar, proven, reliable. The closer they got, the louder his heart pounded. Height 200. He didn't just remember it. It lived in him. Dreams. Flashes. Smells. Screams. All of it came back. This time, the Germans were well dug in. From the southeast flank, they had advanced almost to the ridge. Creating long-term fortifications, permanent firing positions. The command understood, they couldn't afford to lose it. Alexei volunteered to lead a group in a flanking maneuver. To strike from the side, drive out the enemy, and restore the line. Everything was as before. Total silence before the storm. Crisp commands, clenched teeth. Only inside was a different weight. He felt, this was the last, or almost the last. When they struck, it was like thunder. Sudden, precise, furious. Grenades flew into the trenches. Bullets whistled. Soldiers screamed. Alexei burst in first. Automatic rifle in hand. His legs carried him instinctively through the familiar communication trenches. He knew every turn. The Germans were caught off guard. But their machine guns were hammering hard. One of the guys went down with a scream. Another collapsed silently. Nikita was right behind him. And Alexei covered him as best he could. An explosion. And suddenly, silence. Alexei fell. The earth slammed into his chest. Darkness clouded his vision. He felt his body grow heavy. Somewhere nearby was a voice. "Pavlovich, hold on." He couldn't answer. Only breathe. And here are men finishing off the enemy. The height was ours again. He woke up in a hospital. Silence. White walls. The smell of medicine and iron. He couldn't feel his legs. He tried to move. Nothing. A nurse saw he was conscious and called the doctor. The doctor came, looked, and sighed. "You survived, Sergeant. But the wound is serious. You'll have to live differently, without movement." Alexei stared at the ceiling. Then whispered. "The main thing is the height. It's ours. Ours, thanks to you." He closed his eyes. A tear rolled down his cheek. It wasn't from pain. It was everything. Then a different life began. He was transferred to Moscow. He became the face of heroism. Schoolchildren came to see him. Writers. Officers. His Hero of the Soviet Union star hung above his bed. He spoke little. But each word was like a bullet. He didn't like to talk about himself. Only about those who stayed behind, in the earth. Every evening, he looked at the photo. That very height, taken from the air. And always whispered, "I remember you all. To the very last." And when he died, many years later, they buried him right there. At the foot of height 2214. On the granite stone was engraved, "Sergeant Alexei Krevtsov. Hero. Won against a company. For the motherland." And nearby, the pines grew, quiet and peaceful.